picking back up where we left off in the first part of this. So using what we know about unit rates and working with complex fractions, that would come into play with a problem like this one. So a truck driver drove 350 miles in 8 3/4 hours. What's the speed of the truck in miles per hour? So per hour basically means how far is he going in 1 hour. So it's asking us to find a unit rate. So if we set up our rate, our starting rate, we are going 350 miles in 8 3/4 hours. So there's our rate, but you can see that fraction inside a fraction, that complex fraction. So we're going to have to deal with that, kind of like the problem that we used to introduce this idea. So we want to figure out how far we're going in 1 hour. So we need to find a unit rate, which means we're going to have to divide. So we're going to have to divide by the denominator, 8 3/4. So up top, that means we're going to have to divide 350 by 8 3/4. So if we pull that out, 350 divided by 8 3/4, this is where we're going to get into that fraction division that we were reviewing. So when you have a mixed number like this, just as a reminder from our fractions unit, before we go multiplying and dividing, we need to turn that mixed number into an improper fraction. So we're going to quickly change it. So 350 divided by 8 3/4. 8 3/4 is an improper fraction. 8 times 4 is 32, plus 3 is 35, would be 35/4. So now we can go through the steps. So to divide, we are going to multiply by the opposite of the second number. And remember, any whole number can turn into a fraction by putting it over 1. So 350 is the same as 350 over 1. And now we are going to go through and do that multiplication. So 350 times 4 is 1,400. And then 1 times 35 is 35. So we're not quite done here with this problem. So the step of going through the unit rate, we're trying to figure out how far we're going in 1 hour, but what we ended up with isn't actually 1 hour. So this is basically telling us, okay, if we go 350 miles in 8 3/4 hours, that's the same as 1,400 miles in 35 hours. So that helped because it got rid of the complex fraction. It got rid of the fraction in a fraction, but we still don't have our unit rate. So we have to take one more step, and that's to go through that unit rate process again. So we actually kind of have to find the unit rate twice here. Once to deal with the complex fraction and get rid of the fraction in a fraction, and then again to find the actual answer to the problem. So now we can go through and find the unit rate again and get our actual answer. So divide by 35. So 1,400 divided by 35 is 40. So that means we're going 40 miles in 1 hour. So that's the answer to our problem. That is our unit rate. So that's one way that you can use that trick of dealing with complex fractions, is if you have a fraction in your rate. So you can find the unit rate once to get rid of the complex fraction, and then go through your unit rate steps again to find the actual unit rate. While we're talking about complex fractions, this isn't specifically unit rates, but it is another place where you can use this idea of complex fractions. So while we're talking about it, this is a good place to talk about that as well. You can also use what we've been talking about complex fractions to do some conversions between different types of numbers. So one conversion where complex fractions show up is turning a percent into a fraction. So if we're going to do that, you have to remember percent is always out of 100. So if I have a percentage, so if I had 32%, I can turn that into a fraction really easily because percent is out of 100. So 32% would just be 32 out of 100. Where that gets a little bit dicey is if you have a fraction as part of your percent. So let's say if I had 4.5% and I wanted to turn that into a fraction. When I try and set up my fraction, I end up with 4.5 out of 100. So that's a problem because it's a complex fraction. We have a fraction and a fraction. So we have to clean that up, which means we're going to have to use the unit rate process and divide everything to get rid of my fraction and a fraction. So to solve that, on the top, I'm going to end up doing 4.5 divided by 100. There's a couple things that need to happen here in order to actually do this division. First of all, the 4.5 needs to turn into an improper fraction. So in halves, 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9. And then we also have to change our dividing into multiplying. So 100 is 100 over 1. If I flip that, I get 1 over 100. And now multiply. 9 times 1 is 9. 2 times 100 is 200. So 4.5% as a fraction, a simplified fraction that's not a complex fraction, would be 9/200ths.